Yes, thank you very much, Steve. Let me just get here. My job tonight is really around trying to give you all kind of a little bit of a flavor of the journey that we've been through, of going through what has been presented today, identifying some of the bottlenecks that we all have, but making them basically getting them into bite size that we can actually manage. Because again, I think sometimes we chew over too much and we start basically having to basically come up with ideas that we have to basically introduce entire new, you could say, full-fledged systems in order to do anything. But also it sometimes makes it very difficult for an organization to, again, to manage through the decision problems that you'll have around getting funding for projects and all that. So again, what we did at MICT was saying, well, what are some of the challenges we have? And I think most terminal people would recognize that how to manage the yard is often where you could say your ship side productivity, your gate times, and your manning and equipment really comes together around how do you do that better. And traditionally, operations often look at an average productivity across a set of equipment. If for our case here, what RTGs is, well, we're doing, let's say, 12 moves an hour on average. But again, when you then dive into it, you're actually seeing that all the bottlenecks and all the bullwhips that you see in the system is because some RTGs are doing nothing and some are doing plus 30 moves an hour. And obviously that suddenly starts to actually impact and create impact through other parts of the operations and then have an impact. That was what we wanted to say. How do we get at that? Because we're obviously interested in having a better productivity. But again, we can't really just use a traditional method for that. And we had worked a bit with IGO and Avelino, so we understood some of the things they had available, and we engaged in the process around saying, why don't we try to solve some of these problems around a solution that was already in place about looking at how we could get less shiftings in the yard, but we said we needed to do a bit more. Normally, as I mentioned, you have some challenges around making these decisions when you are working with big integrated systems for your TOS at a terminal that, again, trying to do major things that are not configurable, you end up with something that's very costly and can have very big impact and long lead times because it is you could say a challenge. So we were looking for something that we could kind of have a much smaller, you could say, impact and be able to kind of overlay what we were looking at now and develop like a bolt-on kind of through very basic APIs and engagement, and also through solutions more on the IT side that was much more, you could say, manageable from a cost perspective as well, but then also have something that was very quick to market in terms of getting a business outcome. And lastly, being able to basically have an engagement where our own people could take ownership and be part of the entire, you could say, process of developing the business logic that underpins what we wanted to get done, which was really to have a much better, more efficiency in the yard around our productivity. So again, here are the outlined as the agreed outcomes that we ended up with is basically on our workload distribution. We were really improving the workload distribution, which really means instead of looking at the average, we were looking at the bell curve. In reality, you'll always know that you'll have some outliers and you'll have to live with it, whether you like it or not, for various reasons, because still a number of things are random. You got twist locks that are stuck. You got you have outside truckers that suddenly have lost something or whatever. Oh, my presentation went a little wild on me. That you need to kind of just live with, but you need to still have logic that are kind of can live with that reality, but still create the outcome, which is obviously to get most optimal, you could say, productivity on your RTGs, whatever the productivity, because if you add more equipment, your productivity goes down. If you have less equipment to more moves, your obviously average going to go up, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be a good productivity, which means that you can actually feed and get all the cranes to work the same way and present a predictable outcome to your customers, and again, the employees as well that are working the various sites, that they are somewhat evenly distributed in what they do. Obviously, that leads into also your improved turk times. How do you actually serve these customers? Because it's good to have a very good turnaround time. But again, if you still have, you could say that still needs to be done around a bell curve and a deviation, and then look at how do you manage maybe the outliers in a better way. But again, this is again trying to link the components of trucks with RTGs, because again, sequencing is a problem that you'll always end up if you have too many that are going outside that bell curve. Well, then suddenly you'll get out of sequence arriving at loads. You get a number of things that are not really conducive for a good and predictable outcome in the productivity. Not talking about getting less productivity or accepting less, but again, the very high, a lot of time when we hear about these very high kind of productivities, they're often engineered for one ship only and they're then declared. Whilst again, we're looking for the long term or the broader value and making sure that the overall outcome over the long period is actually better, you could say, addressed, and as a company that you can actually create that and deliver that over the entire year, even though you have these seasonalities and other realities within your operations. And then obviously you'll have this about saying, how can we actually use some of this logic towards the outside when we look at how could we potentially stack better in the yard for knowing when people pick up different commodities, different customers pick up in different patterns. None of our existing systems can look at that kind of big, you could say, big data and try to get sense out of it. So obviously that's kind of where we said these things could come together when we looked at the yard. So this is really our focus in our engagement that we have actually, you could say, put together and run now out at MICT today. So just to give everybody kind of a little bit on what I talked about with RTG and the flavor of it. So what I mean with the distribution is here is the bottom. You can see the number of moves in an hour, and up, that's the number of events over the 14-day period where we pulled this data between, you could say, where we had it implemented at one terminal and not in another, and they were this is comparable data, and as you can see, we have on the lighter whatever or orangey color here, we basically we're seeing that it has a sharper uptick and a better bell curve towards the 13 moves an hour, which are on, whilst on the lower end is the more traditional just use of our traditional TOS setup, where we get a lot more outliers and a flatter, you could say, bell curve. And that's kind of, whilst this is a shift that basically gave us what I would call around, this is 12% positive shift. And the way we calculated was, we actually at a point at 20 moves an hour, we basically said, when we have more than 20 moves an hour, our trucks are going to start to wait. That was our, you could say, premise when we went into this, that we said, this is roughly what we're going to see. So what we saw is we saw an internal truck time reduced around 2 minutes. And around 10 to 12%, we have more data, but 10 to 12% a shift below the 20 line. So basically the higher outliers with similar productivity, average productivities, were shifted back into more in the around the average in a better bell curve. So that's obviously, and we still kind of, again, we still have very little data. So as Ramana also mentioned, you need the more data you get, and also the you could say the data points as that evolves, you should not stop looking and think that this solves everything. If you have processes that can be improved, but not for the purpose of the AI, but for the purpose of, if you have additional layers or links or whatever in your process, you should always look at your processes, but not for the purpose of the AI. Let the AI work in itself around these business outcomes. But if you can produce changes to your process that provides a more predictable outcome in certain areas and less work or automation. And one of the things that we went through, and where this has been a bit of a challenge is we've done all this during COVID. So we've not been able to get all these people in the same room. There hasn't been any traveling for this. There hasn't been anything, but there has been engagements, and there has been a way to engage our people together with highly sophisticated IT engineers that are basically able to talk and connect around some business outcomes. And they do all the you could say the call it the IT logic, and we focus on the business outcomes and that we are after, and how we then, obviously we're spending some time also on in the beginning to go back and saying, well, why are we seeing this behavior? Why are we seeing this? There's a bit of an understanding of why certain behaviors are different. And as Gautam was saying, sometimes you are going to see different behaviors because the decision making is not necessarily what you would expect, which is the short-term gain, but it could be over a longer period because it has data that you will not be able, as an equipment controller or anything like that, to be able to see as you sit and try to monitor the you could say the operations. So that's where this has been a very, very good experience and learning for our guys as well, to try to again focus on the business outcome and try to define that business outcome and let, you could say, the AI, and that's kind of where we get to here. We've obviously, similar to what both the issues that Jay presented, that all will have, and we're not saying we have all of them. We have some of them, and we're probably in a place that has been very manual over time, but has gone through a massive transformation in recent year because of COVID, where you've had to suddenly engage in a lot more use of online transactions, simply because, well, you're not going to have people running around with paying for things manually, showing paperwork to customs, showing this locally or to a gate clerk and all. You'd have to go through a massive, you could say, transformation to basically get online in a much different way. And as Jay also said, there are a lot of terminals that are in much better positions, but we all somewhat suffer from the randomness of things not arriving. You got weather. You've always had bad weather. You've always had different things. And obviously with the COVID, the challenges around manning, with the challenges around space on ships and missed sailings and all that, you're having a lot of variability that suddenly gets thrown in. And we haven't been prepared manually, but often you'll also find that your systems not being able to re-engineer and some of these decisions, and being very dependent on manual intervention in as much as also setting what it is, makes it very difficult when suddenly your world is changing. This is why AI does. It adapts over and over. So as your reality changes, it will much easier, in a much better way, start adapting itself to such new realities. So that's kind of where we came, and we're obviously here. Some of the things that we're looking at how we can use this towards our external customers on the land side, engage better with trucking community, with customers, how we can make it better for them in how they do things. Obviously, the same thing on the ship side. How can we do better berthing and stowage? And in engineering side, can we predict our failures much better? Because obviously that's a random inconvenience that happens that suddenly impacts your whole planning in the yard, and you have to do that better. So if you can get ahead of that, there will also be some very good outcomes. And the good thing is here is this is all, you can choose the little kind of a pet case that you would have, and you could basically learn from getting your feet wet on that, and then start evolving as it is. And the process is not that expensive compared to trying to say, should we change our entire TOS? Because nobody delivers that across the board. So we started small, and we're getting more ambitious now, want to look at more, but use the same logic and the way that this is being done. Focus on the business outcomes and how the return is for us, and then get, you could say in this case, Igo and Avellino to basically deliver, you could say, the components around these business outcomes by the use of AI. So I hope that was helpful. And again, feel free if there's questions.